be very different. Andrew Robertson, ABC News.
It's increasingly likely the Tokyo Olympic Games will be postponed until next year because of the coronavirus pandemic. The International Olympic Committee has said the Games won't start in July, but also won't be cancelled.
Last week, the IOC insisted the Games were on, but the world moves quickly in the age of the coronavirus.
They announced that they would consider postponing the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games.
In a letter to athletes overnight, contradicting his position of just 4 days ago, IOC President Thomas Bach said cancellation of the Olympic Games would destroy the Olympic dream of 11,000. Therefore, it's not on our agenda. This morning, the heads of all the Australian Olympic sports met.
We've decided to plan towards the hosting of a Games in 2021 in Tokyo.
We will think of the athletes first and foremost. We may have no option but to consider postponing the Games.
The decision has come as a relief to Australia's 2012 gold medalist in the 50k walk, Jared Talent.
It wouldn't have been a fair Games if it was to go ahead. With so many countries in lockdown, athletes not being able to train, so it's definitely a good decision what's happened. I'm sure quite a few athletes will be relieved around the world.
It gives certainty to the athletes, it gives certainty to our sports, and that's the most important thing, and that's what they needed.
Now comes the logistical nightmare.
Moving the world's biggest sporting event that involves so many people, so many sports, not just athletes but also the world's media, sponsors, the rest, is not easy to do.
The IOC has bowed to the inevitable in the face of enormous pressure. It's given itself 4 weeks to organise the details of the postponement and bought itself some of that most valuable commodity, time. David Mark, ABC News.
There have been calls for clearer messaging from the government on social distancing, particularly targeting young people. Figures show more than a fifth of Australia's 1,100 coronavirus cases so far are among people aged under 30.
As many Australians ignored the advice and filled pubs, clubs and public spaces over the weekend, the Prime Minister is adamant tougher rules were needed.
We don't now have any confidence that people would refrain from gathering in those ways, in those places. Dr Murphy has made it pretty clear that that is principally amongst the younger community.
And it's true, most young people don't get significant disease. But as a young person, you don't want to be responsible for the severe and possibly fatal disease of an older, vulnerable Australian.
But many young people say they are being cautious.
The uncertainty, I think, is concerning. For my own health, personally, probably less so. For other people, a lot so.
Even so, some are clearly not heeding the warnings.
I knew lots of people having like parties and stuff themselves because they were like, yeah, quarantine party, but it's like you're not practicing social distancing at all.
Yeah, I've heard of a few house parties and the bottle shop's still open, so I think they might carry on.
Until they say we're in lockdown and we can't leave our houses, I don't think anyone's going to take it seriously.
The opposition is calling for a clearer message.
These actions might be regrettable, but hectoring will not help. Clear explanations and clarity will.
Has the messaging been clear about it?
I think so. Yes and no. Yes and no. It's sort of obviously it's a new thing every day.
Kind of, yeah. Maybe too much of it that you can't really pick out what they're trying to say.
Others don't want to believe what they're hearing.
I spent the weekend just gone in quite a busy way. I caught up with friends and I sort of in denial, really. Yeah.
But with job losses now happening, reality is starting to set in. James Carmody, ABC News.
There are concerns about an increase in coronavirus cases in Indonesia after official figures show the death rate is on par with Italy. 48 people have died and 514 others have tested positive. That's a mortality rate of 9%. But it's feared the number of cases is being underreported and tens of thousands of people could be infected. Authorities have converted an entire athletes' village in Jakarta into an emergency hospital to hold 4,000 patients. And a state of emergency has come into force in the capital, forcing bars, cinemas and many other businesses to close. You can't get a public gathering any smaller than this. Germany has banned meetings of more than 2 people. It's the latest European country to face a dramatic increase in coronavirus infections. Chancellor Angela Merkel has gone into isolation after potentially being exposed to the disease.
Some moments of cheer among the growing fear and anxiety. Germans appeared on their balconies to thank health workers on the front line. And some musicians gave impromptu performances to comfort their neighbours.
If you play songs from home, it brings people closer together. Then hopefully that makes everybody feel better.
But after many ignored social distancing advice, the German government has now placed tough restrictions on movement, some of the strictest measures seen in the world. Groups of more than 2 people are now banned from gathering in public.
Being in public is permitted only alone, except with your family or with one other person.
Shortly after making the announcement, Angela Merkel herself was quarantined after learning her doctor had tested positive for the virus. As a disaster unfolds in Italy, Russia and Cuba are sending medical specialists and equipment. Another 651 people died in Italy in the last 24 hours. Italians are being warned not to let their guard down, even as the rate of new infections fell to its lowest level since the outbreak began. With Britain just 2 or 3 weeks behind Italy, Boris Johnson signalled a widespread lockdown could be on the horizon. Many took advantage of the sunshine on the weekend, flocking to parks and markets. Now police could be called in to force people back indoors. For the most part, the streets in London are now deserted after the British government shut down businesses. It's now turning its attention to 1.5 million vulnerable people with underlying health conditions. They're being told to stay at home for 3 months. Bridget Brennan, ABC News, London.
A political standoff in the United States has stalled a $1.75 trillion stimulus package to help America through the pandemic. The president says talks are continuing despite Democrats blocking the bill after pushing for more healthcare funding.
I want to assure the American people that we're doing everything we can each day to confront and ultimately defeat this horrible, invisible enemy. We're at war. In a true sense, we're at war.
States are facing shortages of tests and medical equipment, with this New Jersey drive-through clinic shutting half an hour after opening. Disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein, who was jailed earlier this month, is among 33,000 people in the country infected with the disease. And a powerful earthquake has rocked Croatia during a partial coronavirus lockdown of the capital. There are at least 235 cases confirmed in the country. The 5.3 magnitude quake is the largest to affect Zagreb in 140 years, damaging buildings and leaving several people injured. Hospitals were also forced to evacuate. Well, regional economies have experienced significant downturn in recent weeks as the ongoing effects of the coronavirus outbreak hit the export-exposed sectors. The Queensland town of Bowen's, one which is suffering from the uncertainty in domestic and international markets.
At Bowen's Marina, millions of dollars worth of fishing boats lie idle at the wharf. For 22-year veteran of the coral trout trade Ben Collison, it's the worst economic conditions he's ever seen.
Well, 90% of the boats relied on that Chinese market. They've been tied up for 2 months now with no work at all.
Now the slump in domestic restaurant trade has knocked out his last remaining market.
I supply the Rockpool restaurant. They've gone from 400 to 500 people per sitting for lunch, and he called me up the other day and said no more fish.
Wholesalers say the disruption to public gatherings is a major problem for business.
Just reading emails come through saying, advising people not to send their product because the markets will be closing.
And prices have crashed to a point where it's unviable for boats to spend a week at sea fishing.
I think the price point as well is going to be a massive issue, just so the guys are viable to go back out to sea and catch the fish and work.
The fishing industry isn't the only one in North Queensland feeling the pinch. Australia's largest winter vegetable growing sector is also concerned about shortages of staff and demand as farmers hedge their bets ahead of the 2020 season. Seedling grower Neville Travers-Jones says he's seen an enormous drop in demand.
I think some of them, on average, probably we're talking about 25–30%.
The region is still recovering from a price downturn since Cyclone Debbie destroyed crops 3 years ago.
Vegetable grower Carl Walker says there'll be no shortage of food due to coronavirus, but getting workers will be the biggest challenge.
Look, I think most of us are pretty nervous about 2020. This is an unknown. The world hasn't been in this situation since 1919.
A time of great uncertainty. Tom Major, ABC News, Bowen.